Getting it real with RealChunWai on the hottest topics, frank, engaging and candid. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Former Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin has been arrested and charged with abuse of power and money laundering. What is the political impact of this? Would it strengthen the government or lead to its downfall instead? Joining us is political scientist Professor Wong Huat. Salam bahagia Malaysia and followers from around the world. Welcome to another edition of RealChunWai show. The hottest topic in town, of course, is the arrest and of Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, and the court charges against him. And of course, our guest for today is Professor Wong Huat from Sunway University. Huat, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sunway, for having me.
Right, great. We will just dive into the conversation. Now, I just want to get your views, okay? What is the political implication of the arrest of Tan Sri Muhyiddin, and that how would be the fallout, if I may use the word, from the arrest to the political scene?
Well, the consequences would be mixed. On one hand, you would have people who are convinced that the Satu PM and not just Tan Sri Muhyiddin himself are corrupt and therefore cannot possibly be a basic and stable best alternative to UMNO. So that means some of them may actually move towards PH or Barisan Nasional. Then, of course, there's always people who are convinced that they will never. Then you would have, on the other hand, people who feel that this is actually a political witch hunt on the opposition, and therefore they would give their sympathy vote to PN. And between them, you would have the third group of people who simply just get very cynical that all politicians are dirty, no one you can really trust, and therefore perhaps refrain from even participate in the upcoming elections. We wouldn't know which group would be larger. It partly depends on how things are will be unfolded. One is whether or not the prosecution can quickly present convincing evidences. Second, would there be new and immediate instances of double standard, meaning that whether you would have government leaders, whether it's from PH or BN, who get into similar situations but get away. And thirdly, whether PH, the government would send that the government or their leaders would send the wrong messages, the message that this is actually all out to display the opposition, to marginalize opposition, which I think some government supporters are already doing it, but that would only help the opposition because it helped them to present the case as this is a witch hunt.
Now, Huat, as you are aware, that in politics it's all about perception. Every politician, especially prime ministers, they will say that, look, we have no role in trying to influence the MECC. We have got nothing to do with what they are investigating. We do not weaponize the MECC. So look, it's their role. Okay. Now, then there'll be others who think that, look, this is a witch hunt, this is political vindictiveness. And Bersatu has been quick to say that this is a political persecution. So how do you think that the Prime Minister and of course the PH government, how do you think that they should manage this kind of narrative and perception with a state election coming up in months to come?
It would be great if our AGC is already separated, to have public prosecutions separated. But at least what we have seen now is the case is being handled as yesterday in court by the Solicitor General, who is a civil servant rather than a political appointee. But what would be important then is for the AGC to keep to keep consistent when it comes to rule of law. There must not be any withdrawal of cases on UMNO, and the investigations on UMNO-related scandals like the warship must go on. But I think what is more important, and this should have been done by Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, was on one hand saying that law must be applied when someone breaks the law. The other hand, to show that the opposition would be fairly treated. And this is what the government has not done enough. The government has not given the opposition equal constituency allocation. Federal funding to the states were channeled through federal agency for opposition held states. And there's no just goodwill gesture to recognize the opposition shadow cabinet. The government should do all these things as soon as possible. Then you can more convincingly argue and say, on one hand, it's rule of law. On the other hand, we believe in fair competition. The opposition have fair chance to defeat us 5 years from now.
Yeah. Actually, what we're talking about real politics here now.
Of course.
The sentiment here is that well, regardless of whether the government or the PM had a role in this, okay, we put that aside, okay, we make this assumption that MACC is acting freely and independently, but you know, like there's also we've been Malaysia is always about perception and a political talk. The feeling is that look, the Prime Minister had to strike it hard. This is only the tiny window that's left, because after this, where comes the Ramadan month, and of course during the holy month of Ramadan, things would quiet down. Most of the oppositions would not fire shots at each other. Then of course we will have the Shawwal and the Hari Raya. There'll be a lot of celebration, and after that it's the elections. So the window period is so short, and that the people have said that look, Arnold is really one tough guy now. He can make hard decisions to go after his opponents. Forget about the formal charges, but before that, he has been making this the warnings. Look, I don't care whether you're a Tan Sri or you're a Tun, and even it's from my own party or PKR. If you succumb to corruption, I'm going after you. So there was a lot of these heavy warnings. Now, Bersatu has always projected themselves as a clean party. They actually use the word clean, okay, and that. To cast aspersions on UMNO that you're a tainted and corrupt party. Now, now that you have the president facing charges, of course, he's innocent until proven guilty. But would these arrests have any image problem for Bersatu?
Yes, it would be. But as I say, that it depends on who are the takers. The question now comes down to middle ground. What would the middle ground, especially among the Malay voters, look at this case? If they are convinced that this is political witch hunt, then they would just dismiss whatever evidence implicating Muhyiddin and Bersatu. On the other hand, if they believe that this is about applications of rule of law, that's a different story. And this is where I think, but going back to what you say, some peers supporters were very happy that that Anwar Ibrahim is now a tough guy, going to crack down on the oppositions and so on. And whether that held or not, you really have to think about the unintended consequences. And they go back to a debate that has always been happening, but probably not fresh out clearly. One is whether one approach, the conventional wisdom is that don't be kind to your opposition, to your opponent, go hard on them, whether it's on law, on allocations, whatsoever, so that the people would dismiss them. And this was the conventional way used by BN. Now, the problem with that approach is that it also produced very intense partisanship and hatred. Come to the point that people just simply, those who feel themselves or their supported party being discriminated, oppressed, and so on, can then just dismiss whatever thing on the other side. So that destroy the middle ground. The opposite approach, which is less well-known to Malaysians, is that you treat the opposition fairly, to push them to compete. And in that way, especially when the opposition is not prepared, you can win them hand down. And what is important here, coming back to the picture, is that Anwar is constantly being threatened with a Sheraton Move 2.0. And what beside that is whether the middle ground, Malay middle ground, including those who did not vote for him, and even those who may not vote for him in the state elections, agree that he should be treated fairly, to be given the chance to continue. So destroying the middle ground can be backfiring on PH.
Yeah, central in this discussion, the actions taken by Anwar, by Bersatu and so forth. The central, of course, is to win the crucial and determinant Malay votes. Now that's the most issue. The biggest how it will fall out, how it will happen, the impact, of course, it all boils down to the Malay votes. You've noticed that when it comes to question of Malay support for the PH government, the PH government takes it, they look at it very touchy. Any suggestions that the PH government is not getting enough Malay support from the surveys. Of course, the surveys, there will always be contrasting results. Methodology will always be questioned. There'll be the error of margin, okay? So there'll be no real kind of conclusive results. As we know that in 2018, CNN got it all completely wrong. They said that Trump will lose, but actually Trump won. And it's the same here now. But when it comes to Malay votes for the government and support the government is very, very touchy. So they get very upset if the result shows differently. Well, during the GE 15, of course, that most of us felt that the Malay areas went mostly to PN rather than PH. And in 100 days, nobody can expect a turn of events. In all this, okay, you have noticed that suddenly ahead of the elections, the state elections, there's been increasing volumes of voices about race and religion. Why is it starting now?
Oh, it's understandable, because from the PN point of view, if it can successfully frame Anwar as a sellout, a traitor of Malay Muslims and Islam, then nothing that Anwar does, no matter how much for the Malay, Muslim and Islam, would be enough. So the idea is to lock in that perception. And it would always work for PN partisans. It would never work for PH partisans, that we know. Question here is the middle grounds are those who could be voting for anyone, any party. What do they think? So that's most important. And that's the reason why we see the issue, for example, the little-known indie movie Mencegah Terbang getting bashed so extensively now. Without the attack, no one even know that this movie existed. It's just like Tima, the Tima whiskey.
Yeah. And then this movie, Mencegah Terbang, was released 2 years ago. None of us heard about it. And because that is now a controversy, everybody starts looking for it. Just like I tried to look for a bottle of Tima and never the Tima. Okay, so forbidden fruit is always what they call it, attractive to people. Now, but how do you think that the PH government, or particularly Anwar, should react? Would he be tempted to also play the Malay card, the race card, to break into this Malay heartland, or to increase his popularity among the Malays? Do you think that he should be doing that, or he should just continue his image of someone who's moderate Islam, progressive Islam? And he has been saying that, look, it is not race and religion that is your problem of the Malays, but it's corruption. Is that the narrative that he should play?
Yes, I think Anwar is too smart to play the race card. Very simple. You cannot, no matter how hard you play now, you would just look like a fake product. How can you compete with past to be more religious? It's just like when some Amana guys tried to hit on TSMY at one point, when this was under the Muhyiddin government with pass inside, it didn't work, right? So it come back to these questions of how Anwar would not do that. Anwar would continue talking about his inclusive versions of Islam with his interactions with the ulama and so on. He would do all this. Question here is that, would that be enough to convince the middle ground? That's the part what I'm talking about, is that how do we reduce that, the deep hatred between parties? This is nothing new. If you go back to history, one of the worst point in Malay politics was, of course, in the early 80s, when Hadi Awang at that time came out with his Amanat Hadi and causing Malays to split, even among close family and friends, not to pray together, not to attend weddings and funerals, completely cut off of each other, right? Question is, how do we reduce this? And this is, the solution cannot be just about, like, how do I win votes over? We have to think about politics as a spectrum, right? And separate for every party supporters, separate the hardcore and the more middle ground part of that. And it's the middle ground that people need to win. So what we need to do today is to talk about enhancing the middle ground. And one of the things that what I think Anwar should do and has not been doing enough is to harp on crisis. This is an era of crisis. In the past 3 years, we have seen the pandemic, we've seen the war, we have seen big floods happening, not according to any calendar date now, right? So there are a lot of crises. Crisis can rally people together behind the government. And what we need to do is that the government need to refocus the public attentions on the upcoming crisis. And then including on Industrial Revolutions 4.0, the threats of robots on our jobs and so on, right? We need to talk about all these things and then get the public to evaluate both the government and the opposition. And this is why shadow minister from PN should be recognized and paid. The moment you pay them, the public would use amplifying lens to examine them. And this is what you need.
Huat, there's this school of thought that says that the PH government should not be talking about corruption, okay, purportedly involving old leaders and old figures. We need to move on. We will be evaluating your performance by how much investment it can bring to this country, how much improvement it can bring to our life. Right now, we have an economic crisis. The B40, M40 are having a tough time. What are you going to do to improve the standard of living, to mitigate the cost of living? That should be the main concern, rather than to dig up some of the dirts of the past. What is your thoughts on this?
I think that proposal is flawed in mixing two things together. When you talk about corruption, this should be the job. Going after corruption should be the job of MACC and AGC. And solving livelihood issues should be the job of government. And both should happen together in the first case, if you have enough evidence. So the issue is not for the government not to talk about it, is for the government to expedite the process of reforming MACC and AGC, make them independent, so that when they go after any politicians, it will not be seen as political witch hunt. And at the same time, the government should continue and, of course, focus on livelihood issues.
Huat, the central issue which has come to what it is today has been the how political parties, some parties have got so much or perceived to have a lot of funds in the election, and that the amount of money that was spent in terms of their activities was something which we have never seen before. Now, and of course, it becomes a mockery when heads are passed around asking for donations from people who attend their ceramah. We know it's all for sure, okay? I'm a very cynical person. I mean, they got so much cash. Why are people even donating money at ceramahs? The question of political funding and political donations, which seems to be still pretty vague. There's no real conclusive law on how political donation should be done. We all believe that businessmen buy political insurance. They probably support most parties, okay, regardless of their political affiliations. Now, what are your thoughts on what should be done to have some kind of measurement, some kind of mechanism to ensure that political donations are properly done?
Well, we certainly should have an effective law on electoral offences and also a law on political finance where donations to parties have to be regulated and where you can have assurance of transparency and accountability. We need all this. And also public finance for political parties, meaning that parties who that wins enough vote passing a certain threshold, they should be given money from the government so that they can reduce their dependence on private funder. And we should talk about providing level playing field, for example, free airtime for all parties and so on, therefore legitimizing a control on expenses like media, advertisements and so on, right? All these things should have been done. And if you look back, since the Najib government followed by Mahathir, Muhyiddin, Ismail and now Anwar, we have had 5 governments talking about political funding. And has the bill been passed, we will be in a better position to control how parties spending money. And the good thing is that our law and institutional reform minister, Azalina, has said this is one of her 4 priorities. What can be done even before that bill is for the parliament to quickly amend Election Offences Act, either in these sessions or in the next session in June, so that it would have teeth for the EC or the AGC to act on. Today, the Election Offences Act is just a paper tiger. No one takes it seriously.
Correct. Do you think that there's a political will among the politicians to push for this kind of law, or is just hot air? Nobody wants to really push for it because these political parties think that if there's some flexibility, and then it'd be easier for political donors, especially from businessmen, to give the money.
Very good questions, ChunWai. It comes back to what extent our politicians have transformed themselves from gamblers to insurance buyers. By gamblers, I mean that people who think their lucks are always good, and so therefore you just go for the maximum gain and not thinking at all what happened if your luck is bad. On the other hand, insurance buyers are people who are conscious that there are ups and downs in life. You want a fairer system or a safer system so that you, even though that you do not maximize your gain when your luck is good, but when the weather is bad, you would not be flooded, right? So to have all this reform is basically requires our politicians to change their mindset, to recognize that, say, if you don't fix this, I could be the next victim. I think that our political class is overall maturing. How far that, whether this is far enough, that has yet to be seen. But what is more important to make this process faster is for the middle ground to speak up. We need more people who are willing to treat all parties fairly, regardless which party you're going to vote later, rather than everyone's taking a partisan point of view that if the party I support cannot do anything wrong and the party I oppose cannot do anything right. And all this is the crux of the problem.
Yeah, but to be fair, I've noticed that the present government, the signs of political maturity has emerged.
Yes.
especially among the certain ministers. For example, Anthony Loh, I give a lot of high marks for him, that he's prepared to meet even the political opponent or the MCA who has been fighting each other for such a long time. That he's prepared to go to Utah to give donations, and that he has met a lot of people who have got problems because of political differences with DP, and he has handled them very well. And I think that is a mark of political maturity. Same can be said about Hannah Yeoh, who has also handled it quite well. She has been able to tackle a lot of people. The old style of combativeness and aggressive is quite over. What do you also see in terms of signs of non-partisan politics that has emerged in this government?
Yes, I completely agree with your comment just now. I want to add one thing. If you look at the online survey done by the Fly Media, which of course have a very biased, distorted sample size, right? We cannot read their figure absolutely, trust their figure absolutely, but nevertheless, it shows something. About 40% of the respondent constantly reject every minister from the government. Anthony Loh was the only one who get less than 40%. Only 33% opposed to him, even with a very biased sample. What does it mean? It actually point out something very interesting, that you may have Malay voters who do not trust the DAP, who may not be very happy with even Chinese minister. But in Anthony Loh, they just see him as a minister, and for a moment forget that he is from DAP and he is a Chinese. And this is particularly interesting. We need more people like them. But other than Anthony Loh and Hannah Yeoh, I want to also emphasize a few others. Azalina, for example. Azalina is another person who can reach out to people who may not support UMNO, but can still respect Azalina for most of the time. And then the other one is perhaps Salahuddin. Salahuddin performed much better this round than the last round. His menu Rama is not a new idea. It was actually from Najib's One Malaysia, but he managed to push it and solve the problem. As you can see, that PN seems to feel the heat, and therefore they has to belittle, attack this menu Rama. But you could see that there are many people coming up to support this, even though they may not be your traditional PH hardcore. And this is what I mean by expanding the middle ground. It's the middle ground that can protect us. In that sense, we are not as hopeless as in under the first PH government, when the society was dealt with, was facing an unprecedented situations. We do not know how to deal with the divide. I think today we are in a better situation to handle that.
Now you mentioned about these 100 days, okay? Now the surveys and everything, that it's purely symbolic. It dates back to President Hoover's days in the US, where he made a lot of bold decisions in 100 days. But I think that perhaps that the public and the media has given too much attention to this 100 days benchmark. Yeah, I know that it's kind of an indication, but what's your feel about this 100 days benchmark?
I think it's good as a stock taking measure, but we, as you say, we should not go too much into that. What would be more useful is, of course, you like it or not, would be the upcoming midterm state election. But we cannot just read from the state elections of those people who would vote. We also need to look at the turnout. And this is where I think the PH government has not done enough. Groups like Bersih and people like me have been calling for two basic reforms that can raise the turnout by making elections easy. One is to fix and announce the election dates now. Since the 6 states have agreed that they're going to dissolve in the second half of June, why don't they just either, if they want an early dissolutions, go to get the royal or governor's assent, or they just pass the resolutions for their June to complete their term. And then the next thing is for the EC to announce it. Then everyone can adjust the timing to it. That would raise the turnout. Second is to expand absentee voting facilities, meaning that if you're out of your state, don't have to go back. If you live in Johor Bahru, but your constituency is Kota Bahru, don't have to go back. Just vote where you are in the state capital. Let in advance, let the votes be transported home, right? And this would, of course, raise the turnout rate and make people feel that even state election is not a burden. I think PH government, for whatever reason, have been too conservative in looking at these two, ignoring the call for these two low-hanging fruits.
I agree. Did you see in G15 we saw the largest number of candidates? Do you think that this would happen in the state elections?
Yes, it would, but you would see, but it would be less than last time because PH and BN would share up the seats. So it's practically two blocks. PH and BN one side, PN on the other side. You would have some small parties coming in, but after what happened to GTA, that all their candidates contributed deficits to the national coffer, including Mahathir himself. I think next round would be less willing donors to make the government richer. Yeah.
There's been, after the G15, there's been a lot of talk about the green wave, how strong the past party has been. As a political scientist, do you think this is a real strong wave from past, or it was simply because many Malays did not quite know who to vote? They did not quite like a PH, and they didn't want BN. In the end, they said, okay, let's just give it to PN. Do you think that is a correct assumption?
Yes, more of the second. But what we should look at is like there are 30% of voters gave their support to PN. Some of them would be hardcore supporter, or what we call party identifier. They identify themselves with either PAS or Bersatu. And when people talk about that PAS have expanded their support through their religious school systems and so on, that's true. But it's impossible for all the 30% voters come from that, right? They probably make up, let's say, 10 to 15% of hardcore. Then who are the rest? Another 15 to 20%. I do not have exact figure. This is just sort of like, this some figure for discussions, right? Who would these people are middle ground voters, swing voters who probably have not decided where to go, and they were more likely pissed off by UMNO, especially Zahid at that time.
Yeah.
And they could not carry themselves to vote for PH. Part of them were actually ex-UMNO voters, because we look at the way Zahid dropped candidates who were loyal to Ismail Sabri, from Anwar Musa to Shahidan Kashim to Noor Omar and so on, right? All these warlords certainly have delivered their votes and seats to PN. So we really have to recognize this. It was perhaps three issues. One is the success of PAS expanding its base, success of PAS and Bersatu expanding its base. Second is the rejection of UMNO, unfortunately, which is not solved yet, now that the party election is so highly controlled. And the third is a distrust of, is a trust deficit on PH. Because many Malays still fear that if I have a change of government, that the government, if I vote for PH, if PH becomes the government, then it will be controlled by the Chinese, then NAP will be done away, that I'll be worse off than now. That kind of fear may not be rational, but it's real. And if it's not addressed, then of course you will find it difficult. But that fear is also, that fear also vary in different states. We find that in Selangor, for example, the Malay support for Selangor and Penang, the Malay support for PH were higher.
Yeah. And we have Mahathir, who has exploited this fear still playing the same argument that has been using for the last 2 to 3 20 years, 30 years about non-Malays controlling the economy, is still using that. I really cannot make up of Dr. Mahathir. He lost his deposit in Langkawi, and of course he says that he doesn't know why he lost his deposit. I really cannot understand what is his actual role, because that he was in the Pejuang, now he decides to join Putra. What is your measurement and thinking of him?
I think some people just cannot retire. If they retire, their life have no meaning. Therefore, they have to make sure people hear them. And for people to hear them, then they would have to say something very outlandish. If Mahathir were to talk about something very moderate, then no one actually remember him, right? Because there's so many moderates out there. So you can think of it as cynically as product differentiation by desperate politicians.
You know what? I'm going to wrap this up with one final question. We know that in Malaysia, there's never a dull moment in politics. You know that my friends in Singapore Times, they will call me and they say that, ChunWai, what's happening in Malaysia? We need a page one, and we are depending on Malaysia to make to the page one, because nothing happens in Singapore. But if there's too much excitement, it's also not very good, because the people think that, well, there'll be some kind of political instability. You know, there's this fear. The minute that Muhyiddin was arrested and charged, I got calls from the people from Singapore, and of course the people in the stock exchange. They call me, ChunWai, is there going to be a problem? You know, would there be some kind of instability? What are your thoughts on this? Should we think that we should sort of like have some slow down the momentum? You know, we need to catch up on the economy. That needs to be done. What is your thoughts on this before we close this up?
Well, I think that our country is maturing, and maturing politics is the only way for us to eventually resolve our economic limits, to break out of the middle income trap and so on. So we should not fear of all these political changes. Yes, in the past we have 22 years under one prime minister, and the last 5 years we have had 5 prime ministers. This is a good thing. What we need here is that when our political system is becoming much more dynamic and also fluid, it is important for the middle ground to come together. What I mean is that there must be enough voters, regardless of which party you support, that we are willing to come together and say all parties would be judged by us, or most parties at least would be judged by us fairly. Only when we can do this, that democracy can sustain. I know that many Malaysians out there miss the old Malaysia when everything is so certain. Do not forget that comes with a huge price of corruptions. More importantly, as much as you want, you cannot go back to the past. We have moved on. The only way out is through. And in us, all Malaysians who are willing to be the middle ground, I see hope.
Thank you, Huat, for spending time with us with your good analysis. And we really look forward to you to come back on my show to share more of your thoughts. To all Malaysians who are with us, Huat and Huat, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks, ChunWai. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.